One of my favorite niches on YouTube is mega projects. Videos about hyperloops, futuristic cities, and trains that go through buildings. I can't lie, I bloody love it. And when you watch these videos, it's always, China or Dubai, but it is never Britain. Over here in Britain, it's kind of embarrassing. I mean, we struggle to build bus stops and bollards. It costs us more to build less at a slower pace than anyone else in the world. Half-finished trains, potholes everywhere, and all the new houses just look identical, just copy and paste it. It is kind of embarrassing. And this problem, right, Britain being bad at building, everyone seems to agree that, there's a problem. However, everyone has a different excuse for it. Whether it's too much red tape, too many environmentalists, or Baz and Gaz are having too many ciggy breaks. But the real reason goes much deeper than all of that and strikes at the core problem within British society itself. Today we will explore why Britain sucks at building. Back in the good old days, right, we were the OGs of big builds, right? We were like dem boys doing dem bits. In the post-war era, mega projects were like our bread and butter. We turned British slums into like entire futuristic utopian housing estates. Whoa, what is it? Grass. It's beautiful. In fact, at one point, right, we looked at London and we went, London has too many people in it. So we decided to build 32 entire towns from scratch.
And then you also have the legacy of the 20s and 30s, which was a legacy of overcrowding, of really poor housing conditions. So in 1945, a Labour government comes to power and lays down the 1946 New Towns Act.
We were also the people who created the first ever underground train system. We also created the world's first train line and the world's first iron bridge. What's kind of sad is like many of these projects that were like unthinkably futuristic now have kind of been left to decay. We barely update them or give them like just even a lick of paint. And it really paints the picture that Britain kind of feels like it just gave up. So you know what happened, right? At one point, we took a look in the mirror as a country and we went, what happened to you, man? You used to fucking care about yourself. Now look at you. And so, it would be in January 2009 where we as a country decided we were going to change that, where we would announce HS2.
It's official. After months of speculation, high-speed trains will run between London and Birmingham in 15 years' time.
We're going to start here, right? You might know a little bit about the HS2 story, but it's a real good case study to understand like how we fucked it up so badly. And it's a good case study for us to kind of learn more about our problem in this country. It's the goal in the beginning, right? The goal was to make some sort of modern, high-speed, futuristic train line. With the new USBs and nice tea, I don't know. Like something that you might see China or Japan build. We wanted to hang out with the cool kids. And this project came off of the back of HS1. This is, as you probably know it, the Channel Tunnel rail link. That baby go undersea. Get yourself from London to the beautiful city of Paris, enjoying a croissant after your morning tea. It's a work of art. Like, it's kind of amazing we managed to build this thing. Admittedly, it did go 3 times over budget, but it was still seen as a success.
There's the handshake we've all been waiting for, Mr. Fag and Mr. Cosette. The French Transport Minister and assembled VIPs applauded as the two tunnellers exchanged national flags.
Thanks to this link, we saw passengers from Kent into London double. It carries 20 million passengers a year. If an infrastructure project allows twice the amount of people in and out of London, from like an economic point of view, that means twice the amount of customers for businesses. That means more workers for employers. And equally, more opportunities for people to earn big wages in London, whilst living outside of London, where they can take that money and spend it in their own community. And this, my friends, is like the essence of what makes a good infrastructure project. What good infrastructure does is to take the wealth of a country via tax and spread it. It makes your economy more efficient, more productive, and makes people's lives better. So, HS2, the sequel. HS is back, and he means business.
A clear message from the government, High Speed 2 will happen. Plans for the controversial multi-billion-pound rail project were today approved.
So, yeah, the gang got back together, and they were like, yo, we did that thing under the sea. Dope, right? And so we connected London to France, and we thought, why don't we connect London to the north of England? That place that we forgot existed? Why don't we connect these babies up? Let's do something. So via HS2, London was to be connected to Birmingham, Manchester, and Leeds. Via high-speed rail. And the project was estimated that it was going to bring the country £92 billion in long-term benefits. Everything sounded very good on paper. Now, HS2, right, it was a bad time to start it, right? It was 2009. Started under the Labour government, but the Conservatives came in 2010 on a platform of austerity. This is our favourite friend, you know, cutting the public spending, reducing the deficit, yada, yada, yada. All of that fun stuff. And so in this period of austerity, right, where we're trying to save some money, we started to cut big infrastructure projects that were planned. Projects that were really needed a lot more than HS2, especially in the north, right? There was a number of projects up north, and famously, the north is always underinvested in. It's always London where all the investment goes into, but they scrapped a bunch of them, like the Leeds Supertram. This was scrapped because it was going to cost 1.6 billion. We also cancelled Northern Powerhouse Rail, desperately needed connection from Manchester and Liverpool, and we abandoned a ton of plans to electrify the train lines. That is after having spent hundreds of millions on the paperwork already. And so you see, you know, throughout this austerity period where everything's being gutted and everything's being cancelled and scrapped, HS2 was the boy that lived. But you might be wondering, why? Basically, politicians really love shiny things. They decided that because, you know, we're British and we have to be better than everyone in Europe, we completely over-engineered this train to be fast. It didn't need to be as fast as it is, but we decided we had to just because. And, you know, despite the country's actual needs, like the projects that we actually needed were put aside so that HS2 could become a monument to the ambitions of politicians. Superstitions. And so, karma would come for Britain and its hubris. Before we continue with today's video, I want to give a massive shout out to today's sponsor, CyberGhost VPN. When you're online being a digital dude, every time you're on the internet, there are weird brurs basically spying on you and watching what you do. Even incognito mode won't stop your internet service provider, your school, your work's IT department, even your Wi-Fi routers spying on you. They can all trace what you do. And that's where CyberGhost VPN comes in. All you gotta do before you browse is select one of their over 100 locations to encrypt and reroute all of your internet traffic through one of their secure servers. CyberGhost VPN also unlocks geo-restricted content and games from over 40 different streaming platforms. Netflix, Amazon Prime, Disney Plus, you name it. It's also available on all major operating systems, Windows, Mac, iOS, Android, and you can use one account to protect up to 7 devices at one time. So if you're very nice, you can share it with your friends and family. With over 38 million users worldwide and over 20,000 excellent reviews on Trustpilot, it is one of the best VPNs out there. They got a banging deal right now with my link in the description, which is just $2.03 a month. Plus, you get 4 months for free, which works out as 84% off. There's a 45-day money-back guarantee, so honestly, you have nothing to lose. Anyway, back to the video. The estimated cost, right, this will kill you. It went from the original budget of £33 billion, that's how much they told us it would cost, and eventually ballooned to £100 billion. It's quite a bit. If I told you I was going to fit your carpet for £20 and I came back and said, actually, it's 7 million quid, you'd probably be like, what the fuck? And so, yeah, you know, with no ceremony, no apology, no, hey guys, this is what went wrong and this is how we can fix it in the future. None of that stuff. The government simply announced that most of the northern part of the connection would be scrapped.
HS2 is the ultimate example of the old consensus. The result is a project whose costs have more than doubled, which has been repeatedly delayed, and it is not scheduled to reach here in Manchester for almost 2 decades.
And like, not only was there no apology, Rishi Sunak, when he announced it, he was talking like it was some brave and bold decision, like he was like this hero.
And so, I am ending this long-running saga. I am cancelling the rest of the HS2 project.
HS2 became the most expensive railway per mile in the world, and it was unfinished. However, for us in this video where we analyse, you know, why Britain's shit at building, HS2 is a very good symbolic event to analyse, because as a story it kind of has a bit of everything in it, and it could have been a lesson so that the government could learn why we're bad at building. So what we'll do the government's lesson for them. What actually went wrong, and how do we avoid this happening again? So there's multiple arguments people make when it comes to why Britain's really bad at building. So we'll start with one of them, which is NIMBYism. NIMBY, if you don't know, stands for not in my backyard. The idea that people want things to be built in this country. Yeah, they want to build houses. They want us to build renewable energy. They want us to build train lines, just nowhere near them. These are like groups of homeowners who are kind of seen as the anonymous Karens of British politics. During the early stages of HS2, Conservative MPs were kicking off because wealthy homeowners in their constituencies were getting really angry at the idea of HS2.
An affluent suburb in northwest London, Ickenham now finds itself in a fight against HS2.
There's going to be a huge construction site which will be there for 10 years with a concrete factory, a concrete tunnel lining factory, a decontamination plant, hundreds of lorries.
Brian Adams found out recently that this land opposite his home will be a construction site. Hundreds of HGVs a day will use it, and unlike some in rural areas, here, there's no compensation.
So in order to appease these wealthy homeowners, they demanded that we tunneled under the Chiltern Hills for 13 kilometers. And tunneling in this country costs an insane amount of money. We did this purely to protect the gentle British landscape and also the property values of very wealthy homeowners. And this tunnel, yeah, it cost us about £1 billion extra. One part of HS2 was delayed because of a rare species of bat.
This is the HS2 Bat Tunnel, a £100 million, 1 kilometre shed to protect the estimated 300 bats in woodland nearby.
And like HS2 aside, there's other projects. There was a £750 million proposed film studio that was planned to be built on a disused quarry, which was rejected because residents thought it was going to spoil the area. The area being a literal barren hole in the ground. So yeah, there is truth that NIMBYism is a thing. The UK does have a planning system that does give probably too much power to very hyper-local interests. And this is also part of one of the other arguments people make about regulations. Our planning policy, right, it's meant to be updated every 5 years. But the bros was super busy and we just didn't get round to doing it. So we haven't been able to meaningfully update our planning permission for ages. The rules are pretty outdated now. And the problem with outdated rules is it means that developers don't really know if they're in or out of guidelines, which opens the door for more legal challenges, which can result in more delays, which adds time and costs more. And this sort of thing really does have big effects, like big projects that should have only taken 5 years now take 23 years. Like the 15-kilometre A428 road from Milton Keynes to Cambridge. It was first proposed in 2003 and now is expected to open maybe in 2026. If we're lucky. And some would call this over-regulation and having too much red tape. And I'm not going to totally shoo it away. There is a case to be made where some of our rules are probably out of date. Especially when it comes to things like mixed-use housing. We often over-regulate the need to have car parks, and our zoning rules often mean that you have to separate shops from houses. What this inadvertently does is make towns dominated by cars. And as we look to Europe and more progressive places where walkable towns are becoming super popular and everyone seems to love them, in the UK, they're often regulated out of existence. But very often, the real problem isn't a case that there's too much regulation. It's often that the bodies that are in charge of this are underfunded, and this creates outdated regulations that no one seems to bother to update as things change. In the countries that do build well, regulations are there, but they're just very clear, and they're updated to align with public good. But here's the thing, right? Whilst, NIMBYism and overregulation can exist, it is very often weaponized by the media. Because you have to think of it like this, right? When a community rejects plans to build luxury houses in their small town, is it really about the views or the rare species of squirrel? Or is there a very rational fear that a flood of expensive private housing will drive up local rents, strain local services, and price them out of their hometowns? These aren't always overreactions. They're not always Karens.
Change has come fast to a once much maligned housing estate, and for many, regeneration has brought hope. But for others, particularly older residents, gentrification has been unsettling, disrupting communities and demolishing old haunts.
They're getting priced out of the market, the locals. I think it's disgusting, to be honest with you. They don't give a.
Who's they?
The suits and boots in town.
A lot of the time, NIMBYs are looking out to protect themselves. And really, what a NIMBY is more of a symptom of a country that has forgotten how to think collectively. Britain doesn't think like a cohesive society anymore. It thinks like a collection of atomized individuals, all competing against each other for their own personal interests. And this isn't an accident. Since the 80s, the British public has been trained, both culturally and systemically, to look out for ourselves over each other. Margaret Thatcher famously once said, "There is no such thing as society." And basically, our entire society was rewritten to have people think of themselves as like mini capitalists, managing your personal budget, looking out for your personal brand image, investing in a portfolio of assets.
Some socialists seem to believe that people should be numbers in a state computer. We believe they should be individuals. We're all unequal. No one, thank heavens, is quite like anyone else, however much the socialists may pretend otherwise. And we believe that everyone has the right to be unequal.
When you zoom out, NIMBYism actually makes perfect sense. When you live in a town whose schools are oversubscribed and you've started to grow a third nipple because you haven't had a GP appointment since 2017, when you hear a plan of building luxury flats in your town, you're going to turn around and think, hang on a second, this is going to make my life worse. For instance, right, in the town of Milton Keynes, the city of dreams, where the average rent price is about 1,290 odd, you often hear people get a bit upset when they propose building new tower blocks in the centre. And some people will get annoyed at these locals because they'll be like, well, you're being selfish. You know, we're in a housing crisis and we need to build more houses to try and bring the price down. But this is really important because there's a bit of an irony in capitalism here when it comes to houses, where the concept of like supply and demand doesn't really work how people think it works. If a development firm builds a block of flats in Milton Keynes, they're not going to build cheap, affordable homes. No, why would they? They would instead build luxury flats for London commuters, people that work in London and live in Milton Keynes. So you got to think about what this does to the local economy, right? If you have a bunch of people that earn money in London, those higher wages, and you just bang a massive population of high earning individuals into Milton Keynes, individuals who are willing to pay a slightly higher rate for rent, this means that the rent for the locals who are already living in Milton Keynes will go up because the land has become more valuable. Because now it makes more sense for the landlords to be chasing the rents of wealthy Londoners who are commuting as opposed to slightly poorer locals. And so the locals get priced out of their hometown. And so instead of the natural logic that would be to build more houses, increase the supply, and the price will go down, what happens is the opposite. As well, like back on HS2, if you're, you know, a homeowner in a wealthy town and you live in the countryside, and when they tell you they're going to build HS2 and it's going to obstruct your view in your back garden, it might have just knocked off like £40,000 to your property value, because having a railway by your home lowers your property value. People don't want it as much. So when it comes to proposals for HS2, you might be inclined to reject them. Both of these situations, as different as they are, come from the exact same place. They are the rational defense of individuals protecting their own interests in a system that no longer defends the collective. It's not so much as not in my backyard, it's more so, if I'm not going to benefit from this, then why should I bear the cost of it? In a hyper-individualized society such as Britain, that is a rational response. And there is nothing that exposes this break of like the collective social contract more clearly than the housing crisis.
A generation of young people may never be able to own their own homes because of a grave housing crisis.
Everyone wants a decent place to live and one that doesn't eat up all their income. But a home you can afford seems increasingly hard to find.
When it comes to houses, right, every politician, every think tank, and every YouTuber with a ring light will tell you the same thing. The reason house prices are so high is because we do not build enough homes.
We need to have a house building campaign. At least 5 million houses. Very simple supply and demand demonstrates that, you know, you'd have jobs for people in Britain, you'd have affordability because the price would go down, it would be available. Now, that is going to ruffle some feathers with some people who have been led to believe that their wealth is tied up with owning their house, unfortunately. But in order for young people to be able to afford having houses and to be able to have a proper, robust investment and an industry and an employment, that's what we need to have happen.
And at first glance, you hear that and you go, yeah, it makes sense, right? We need this amount of homes and they're not building them very quickly. When they tell you there's not enough supply, it sounds technical, it sounds economic, and it sounds politically neutral. But there is a part of that argument that they are sort of leaving out, that they're a little bit quiet about, is that we have more homes per capita right now than we did in the 70s, but the prices of homes are up by 5,900%, or 300% if we adjust for inflation. That is to say that we have more bedrooms, more square footage, more housing units per person right now. I mean, there's about 1 million empty homes in this country. So if this was all about supply, then we should be in the golden age of affordability. There's tons of supply. There's a lot more supply than there was at a time when house prices were lower. But this is the thing, and this is what you need to know, is that there is something else going on. The people who control what is being built do not want to build it, at least not too quickly. Across the UK right now, developers are sitting on over 1.2 million planning permissions for homes that have been approved to build on, and they have just chose to not build on them. These are good to go, you know. These haven't been denied. They're not tangled in legal loopholes to protect Jackie's view in her garden. They are approved, stamped, and ready to go. And the developers aren't building. Why is that? Well, you see, right? Once you've got a plot of land and you got planning permission on that plot of land, it now goes onto the development firm's books as an appreciating asset, an asset that is growing in value over time. Development firms can then borrow against that asset. They can trade it, or they can sit on it and just let the price rise. And then when the market is absolutely desperate, they will build very, very slowly, just slow enough to sell the property at the highest price they can.
In Thamesmead, for example, they want to build 35,000 houses around that area, but it's going to take them 30 years. Part of the reason is because if they build them too quickly, their market price goes down, so they don't get as much profit. How can Treasury work with the Mayor of London to release that land at a different cost profile, so make sure they can get the money and build quicker?
This is called land banking, and it is never, ever talked about in the media. They will never talk about it because this is the fundamental problem. You can point to isolated events of like 20, 30 houses being blocked by certain plans, and you're allowed to talk about immigrants and their pressure on housing supplies, but you're not allowed to talk about land banking. They never talk about it. And so whenever you hear one of these industry goons tell you that NIMBYs are the problem and that we need to relax planning permissions, always remember who is funding this message. It is think tanks, bought and paid for by development firms themselves. When they argue for deregulation, they're not arguing for more walkable cities that are more green. That isn't what they're arguing for. What deregulation is to them is to give private development firms more access to more land, more permissions, more control, and ultimately for them, more speculative assets, so that they can carry on getting planning permission, sitting on it and watching the price of their asset rise without laying a single brick. And this is the thing, right? Development firms do not make their money by solving the housing crisis. They make it by maintaining it. So my friends, I know this is all very heavy, right? So I want to take us on a brief detour. Grab your walking sticks and your Polaroid camera, and we're going to talk about land. Good old-fashioned land. There's an important thing you need to understand about land and housing, is that it doesn't work like how a normal market works, right? You can't treat it like iPhones or, I don't know, the baked bean market. Oh, that's probably not a good example. And that's because land itself is finite. You can't make more of it. Even Adam Smith, who's like the OG capitalist, he's that big business boy, he understood this as well. He separated the economy into three parts: labor, capital, and land. The value of land is driven by its location. Locations gain value based on a lot of things. Public investments into making, I don't know, state-of-the-art education facilities, fast public transport, the local people creating cool businesses that people want to come and be a part of. All these people doing things on a piece of land makes that land more valuable because people want to come there. But in that, soup of people floating around doing cool things and making it valuable, the person who did nothing in that was the private landlord. The person who just owns a piece of paper that says he owns the grass. Back in the 19th century, an American economist called Henry George, he noticed this too, and he argued that landlords who profit off of rising land value should be taxed in a tax that people call an LVT, a land value tax. And that tax should be paid out to the people who put the effort in to make the place valuable. And the idea is pretty smart. It's to stop rewarding landlords who do nothing and earn money off of the backs of other people's hard work, and to disincentivize that as a practice. In Singapore, who sort of follow the similar logic, the people, via the state, the government, own 90% of the land, and about 80% of the population live in government-owned flats. These are not slums, they're not like shitholes, they are very well built, high quality, near schools, public transport, shops. They're amazing. It's really quite a feat of urban design, and they are very affordable.
In the 1960s, 3 out of 4 Singaporeans lived in overcrowded and unhygienic squatter areas. Today, the cityscape tells a completely different story. Across the island, there are more than 1 million public housing flats. They house 80% of Singaporeans, and a vast majority of them are homeowners.
Now, don't get me wrong, Singapore has its own issues, such as bringing cheap migrants and keeping them in people's cupboards. But Singapore does prove a point that the government can build high-quality, affordable housing at scale if you treat land as something that belongs to everyone, not just a rich person who has a piece of paper. However, this right here strikes at the core contradiction of British society. If there's no such thing as society, if we're just a nation full of individuals, how does this nation full of individuals solve collective problems? Whether that's housing or high-speed rail or fixing the bloody potholes. These are things that you can only do when you build for public good. And this brings us to the underlying rot at the heart of the whole system. If NIMBYs are like a symptom of a wider sickness, I would say that the actual disease is privatization. After the 70s, right, when we sort of embraced neoliberal philosophy, agencies like the Greater London Council, a government body that had its own internal designers and entire housing teams, they were abolished. Jump forward to the 90s. We brought in a thing called compulsory competitive tendering. This forced councils to put up our core services that the councils themselves used to deliver out to the market so that private companies could bid for the contract to do it themselves for the government. This includes everything like from architecture to planning, road maintenance, even bin collection. Private businesses deliver that to our government, who pay them money. And like the rot went deeper. It weren't just the Tories, right? When New Labour came in, who, I mean, they are the Tories, but public-private partnerships, PPPs, and private finance incentives, PFIs, meant that instead of having like public infrastructure that is owned by the public, that the government and the people own, they are now financed by, designed by, built, and owned by private contractors. And what the government does is pay those private contractors a licensing fee so that we can use it. These can be things like schools and hospitals, etc. And if you hear that and you think, what the actual fuck, that is insane. Who thought that that was a good idea? Then I know, mate, it is insane. You're not crazy. Like in Britain, we deliberately, by choice, moved away from having government teams who oversee entire projects and instead moved to outsourcing everything to layers and layers of private management consultants, engineering firms, and finance goblins who, it seems, their main skill is just to siphon taxpayer money without delivering anything that actually works. For instance, with HS2, a government company was set up called HS2 Limited, who are meant to manage the whole project, but they literally just outsource everything. By 2021, HS2 Limited had paid out 600 million in consultancy fees, paying people just to tell them what they think about the project. No labour, no digging, no concrete, just some bloody good chit chats. You have firms like PwC, Arup, Mott MacDonald, and CH2M Mill who literally make inordinate wealth just advising on these projects. Yeah, just a bit to the left there, Barry. No, a bit to the left. Yeah, very good. That's very good, mate. Yeah. These private entities pop up time and time again across loads of UK infrastructure projects, and they fuck it up time and time again, but they still get the work every time. Crossrail, it was 4 billion over budget. It was years late, and that was delivered by Bechtel, and a company called Turner and Townsend was the project management firm, who also conveniently advised on HS2. Both were paid millions despite all the many delays. Garden Bridge, a project that was literally cancelled before they even broke ground, somehow cost the taxpayers still £43 million. 6 million alone went on lawyer fees.
At Temple, this is where the Garden Bridge was to span the Thames. It was meant to look like this. Instead, there's nothing, and it has cost millions.
So I know I've given you a lot of information there. I just want to summarize what our building model is, how we do infrastructure in this country. The government goes, oh, we need this thing, I don't know, a hospital. The government then goes and outsources the planning and the delivery of that project to various different consultancy behemoths, who usually always are American firms, who deliberately say to the government that we can do it for a very reasonable, very cheap price. That firm then hires a ton of other private firms to actually do the work. All of this chain of bureaucracy, etc., means that delays kick in, the costs rise, and then the consultancy firm that we've hired goes, fuck! Oh my god, I'm so soz. But unfortunately, there's been some unforeseen circumstances. It's going to cost 3 times as much as we said it was. And then when the project goes tits up, gets cancelled, or, if we decide to do it, no one is held to account, no one gets put in jail, and give it a couple of months, maybe a year, and they'll go and do another contract for the government. All the while, wealth is extracted from the taxpayer through the government to private firms. And behind these firms are individuals who have very close links to the government. Andrew McNaughton, former director of HS2 Limited, moved on to Systra, one of the consultancy firms that HS2 employed. This revolving door, right? This right here is what my dad calls the old boys club. But what if, my friends, what if there was another way? Far, far, far away in the distant lands of Spain and France and Germany, major infrastructure projects are still largely delivered by state-owned or very tightly regulated public bodies. Now, they might hire some contractors to do the manual work, etc., but the overall project management and the long-term vision stays in-house. In Norway, they built a 24-kilometer undersea tunnel for £150 million. Here, in Britain, we spent £267 million on the paperwork for a new Thames crossing, and we hadn't laid a single brick.
Just remind listeners where the new crossing is, where it takes off and where it lands.
It's... you'll forgive me, I can't recall the exact landing zones.
So the crossing that you're talking about, you don't know where it is?
Well, it's just for people.
I mean, I don't want to go on about this, but it is about the 19th word in the press release, the Lower Thames Crossing. Let me tell you, Gravesend in Kent, Tilbury in Essex, those are the two towns.
Tilbury, yeah. It was Tilbury that I couldn't, yeah.
How much is it going to cost?
Yeah. Well, overall, it's going to cost several £1 billion.
How many? You don't know that either, do you, actually?
Well... it has already cost quite a lot of money.
I don't wish to be rude to you personally. Is there much point continuing this conversation? Because you don't know where a bridge starts, you don't know where it ends, and you don't know how much it costs. So is there any point continuing?
As I said, the money that we are putting in is crucial to unlocking this project, which has been years in planning.
Secretary, you don't know how much it is.
Well, it's several billion, as I've said.
It's 10 billion, to put you out of your misery.
10 billion.
Yeah, so it's not several, it's 10. What does this say about the economic stewardship of this country, that someone in your position of importance, you don't know where a bridge starts, you don't know where it ends, and you don't know how much it costs?
In other, more I don't know, not fucking insane countries, they don't privatize and subcontract every single layer of a project. They just build it with civil engineers who are employed by the government on a salary. It's that simple. But like, you know, and I think really if you were to explain this to lots of people, they would think, why don't we just do it like that? But the thing is, in our politics, the development firms and the private subcontracts are making a fucking killing extorting the British people. And so with that killing, with that insane amount of money, they then lobby the politicians so that they keep doing things this way, so that they never change their approach, because it makes them money. And so what we've had to do then is have a political class that try and push this ideology that governments are in no way capable of managing infrastructure projects. They can't do it. There's no way. Despite all of the overwhelming evidence that in every other country where the government does manage it, they do it and it works very well. And that back in the day, back when Britain used to do the same thing, where we had entire government departments full of engineers, architects and planners, and we built these amazing things. We built 32 new cities. Now, what we've done is, instead of having government departments full of architects and engineers, we've replaced them with procurement officers whose job is just to outsource the contracts to other people. It's embarrassing. And like, you know, obviously markets have their place and they can deliver certain things better than probably a government can, but public infrastructure is obviously and clearly not one of those things. Because think about it, it's not a normal market, right? When you want to build a railway that goes up the length of the country, how many customers are there for that job? There's one customer, the government. The demand is one, and they need this project, right? They need it. They don't have any bargaining power. They can't go and shop down the road. They have absolutely no leverage in the market, so the companies can just put any price tag on it and they can just squeeze us for as much money as possible. And there is absolutely no incentive for them to offer a better product for cheaper, because where else are we gonna shop? And so they do what you would expect in that situation. They extort us. It's like, you know, the way I'd compare it to is like, imagine you are dying of thirst and you need water and you're carrying a massive bag of money, but you're in the desert. A geezer comes along and offers you a bottle of water for £17 million. You are going to pay £17 million for a bottle of water. And because of this revolving door, this old boys club of all these people that are all in bed with each other, even when they fuck up the jobs, they still get rehired or just get moved around. Many other countries don't do this, and that is because they're not insane people. In many other countries, they invest into the long-term vision of the country. They have a trust that civil servants can manage these projects. They build things not because it's profitable for shareholders, but because they are useful for the people. So like, where does this leave us? Well, I mean, we have a choice to make. Either we carry on doing it the way we do it, allowing private development firms to just trickle out overpriced flats, or us getting rug pulled every time we want a train track, and then pointing at overregulation and hippies wanting to protect bats as the problem, or we admit the truth that infrastructure is far too important to be left to the free market. That this crisis we're in isn't accidental. It is engineered. The reason that Britain sucks at building is really quite simple. We abolished the state's ability to build and replaced it with a rota of private firms who see infrastructure projects as a way to loot the public treasury. Britain doesn't suck at building because it has to. It sucks because it has chosen to. If you enjoyed this video, be sure to go and support me on Patreon. It massively helps what we do. I'll catch you in the next one. Peace. Also, don't forget to check the link in the description to get the special discount that CyberGhost VPN are offering specifically to you guys. This application will protect your data whilst you browse and give you full access to block content for only $2.03 a month. It's totally risk-free, so make sure you check the link in the description. Peace.